What's up, everybody? Today we are previewing all things about the 2025 Philadelphia Eagles, including if Jalen Hurts is the early round QB to target in fantasy drafts, if we should actually be considering fading Saquon Barkley because of his heavy 2024 workload, whether or not A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith can both ball out in the same season, all that and much more coming right at you. So accordingly, let's get right after it. Myself, Ian Hartitz, and Dwain, the Rock McFarland from Team Fantasy Life. And Dwain, we'll kick things off with the reigning Super Bowl MVP, Jalen Hurts, who at this point, hard not to give the man his flowers as an incredible real-life quarterback, but certainly we know him to be one of the best in fantasy land. But that's kind of what makes his current ADP all the more surprising. Yeah, he's the QB4, both in our ranks and in the, public ADP streets right now and everything. But to see him going so far behind guys like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Jaden Daniels, I don't know about you, man, but I really like that value in round 5.
Yeah, I love it. I've taken Hurts a few times. Like, it hasn't worked out perfectly, but if you are playing, in a best ball draft, there are times where you can get the A.J. Brown slide to you, and then DeVonta Smith you can get, and then you can get Hurts. Or it's kind of easy to stack him. Not easy with A.J. Brown. It's a little tougher now, but you can easily stack him with DeVonta Smith. So this is a player, Ian, that, just 2 years ago, threw for 247 yards per game. Now, last year that came down to 194, but the year before was at 227. So I think the big question here for us is, are we that certain, right, that the Eagles are really just going to throw for 194 or 200 yards per game, and they're going to lean into the run as much as they did last season? I think if you and I had to sit here and say, okay, Madden playbook for the Eagles, it's going to be run balanced at least, but it might not be as run heavy as last season. So listen to these drop back rate over expected numbers over the last 3 years, minus 6.5%. And so, guys, what drop back rate over expected does, it looks at the game situation, the points that they're ahead, are they in a close game, are they trailing, it looks at the down and distance, and then it just compares what the Eagles did to the rest of the NFL over the last 4 seasons of data that we have. So that minus 6.5% says, hey, once we take all those things into account, they were still a really run heavy team. That was the 32nd ranked drop back rate over expected. But the year before, they were at 19th, Ian. It's minus 0.6, and the year before they were at 17th at minus 1.3%. I know the easy equation or math here is just, they added Saquon, so obviously they're just going to stick with that. But I really do think there's a chance that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. So I think there's even a little bit of upside here with Jalen Hurts. We know what he's going to do as a rusher. We're talking about a guy that over the last 3 years, Ian, 14, 15, and 13 rushing touchdowns. He gets roughly half of his team's carries inside the 5-yard line, led all quarterbacks last year with attempts inside the 5 with 45% of them. And that's just something that, the league can't stop. Right? They're trying to bring up a rule to stop it, but that hasn't passed. So at this point, I think we got to feel really good about Hurts, locked into double-digit rushing touchdowns. And man, he could see more passing volume this year. It's really tough to be down in the range they were at last year, which was a 48% drop back rate, Ian.
Eagles have the second best point differential in the NFL last season and have lost quite a bit on defense. That has kind of been their quote unquote issue this offseason, but obviously only so many dollars you can give all those offensive stars. Something had to be done there. Not expecting Vic Fangio's group to fall off, a cliff or anything like that, but could be a situation where, again, not necessarily the most elite defense. Accordingly, maybe get, some more back and forth shootouts, if you will, from this squad. So with Hurts, he has averaged at least 20 fantasy points per game each of the past 4 seasons. And again, Dwayne, is one of those things where, unlike someone would say Justin Fields, we actually have seen that passing ceiling reveal itself at least one occasion. As you mentioned, 247 passing yards per game. That said, still it does seem difficult to really justify getting him up there fully ahead of guys like Lamar, Josh Allen, and even Jaden Daniels. But again, when you consider those guys are going usually early, mid parts of round 3, and we can get Hurts closer to round 5. Again, I think once you do consider that cost, straight up, man, if I'm in my home league, just drafting one team this year, I think I'd take Hurts over all those guys.
Yeah, their ceilings all come in, and the ceiling and floor projections that we've built, they all come in really close. Because there is a range of outcomes. We could suddenly see Hurts throw more like what he did in 2023. We don't have to go back that far. Even 2022 to say that, hey, man, like this guy could throw for 235 yards per game instead of, 194. So I do think that there's a lot of room here. I agree with you. I think of the guys that are the dual threat, elites, quote unquote, he is the best just because because he's going the latest in drafts. And I do expect a little bit more passing. Like I've got them projected for a 54% drop back rate this season, Ian, which is above the 48% that they had last year. So I just, here's the other thing. He threw for 194 yards per game last year, and he still scored 22.4 fantasy points per game. So it's like he's probably not going to be that low again. And it's just like we've already seen kind of the worst case scenario, in my opinion, as a passer, and he still eclipsed 22 points per game. So it's like he feels like a lock. Like it's just really hard for Jalen Hurts to fill.
Again, might be having a different conversation if the tush push has been banned, but it hasn't. So once again, we are projecting this guy for double-digit touchdowns on the ground, which is really wild to say for a quarterback. But then again, Hurts has accomplished that in each of the past 4 seasons. Josh Allen with 2 and Cam Newton with 3 are the only other quarterbacks in NFL history with multiple such campaigns. So again, don't hate the player, hate the rule if you want. Right now, Hurts remains one of the most fantasy-friendly players in all of fantasy football. Of course, Dwayne, all those 1-yard tush pushes do have a negative impact on someone, and that is reigning Mr. 2K rusher himself, Saquon Barkley. Now, pretty hilarious that we did have Hurts scoring all those goal line touchdowns, did not prevent Saquon from, again, basically blowing up fantasy football last year. That said, that was in 2024. This is in 2025. Do you have any concerns about treating Saquon as the RB1 in fantasy land, given how many touches he did end up racking up last season?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Saquon, I'm not fading him because of his touches, right? I've really researched that in the past, and I know sometimes that does work out to be the thing where the next year the player falls off. But also when we look at Saquon, I think the thing that's more scary for me is just the crazy efficiency that he had. He averaged 5.8 yards per carry last season. Ian, if you look at his touchdown runs, listen to these. Listen to the ones that were, and I'll include the playoffs as well. 3 of these will be the playoffs. But he had touchdown runs of 65, 39, 23, 72, 70, 25, 68, 60, 62, and 78 yards. I mean, we're talking about a guy. Yeah, like 4 of those came against the Rams, 2 of them in week 12 and then in the divisional round. But you look at him, man, 26% of his yards, his 2005 yards came on in the regular season, came on just 7 attempts. So if we get rid of playoffs, and if we look at his touchdowns, 54% of his rushing attempts came on those 7 carries. So is he going to break that many long runs this season? No. Is he going to stop breaking long runs? No, he's still going to have some. He's got Jalen Hurts that the defense has to worry about, and they have a great offensive line. So I'm not saying Saquon's going to suddenly go to 0. It's just going to be really hard for him to break that many long touchdown runs. And what's interesting about it, Ian, is a lot of things that, we were kind of concerned about with Saquon Barkley last season, they really came into play. We already talked about Jalen Hurts handled 45% of the attempts inside the 5-yard line. So that limited Barkley. Now, Barkley, I will say, had 9 carries that he was tackled at the 1. And all of those, except for 1, were short yardage work. So you know how it goes. And Jason Kelce even said early in the year, hey, man, you better score, because if you don't, like, they're going to go to Jalen Hurts. And that did play out. But the other thing is, we just talked about the fact that with whenever you have A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith and Dallas Goedert, even if you're a pretty good receiver out of the backfield, like, man, it's hard for the quarterbacks to want to throw it to you, because typically one of those other guys are open. They're further down the field. That's better for your team. And we really did see that play out. He only had a 13% targets per route run. That was a career low for Saquon. So I don't think he's going to be that involved in the passing game again if everyone is healthy. And then if he doesn't get some of these long runs, the bottom line is, yes, there's room for regression. The question, though, and I mean, asking you this, like, great, let's say he loses half of those long touchdown runs. But he could also pick up 3 or 4 of those short yardage ones that he didn't punch in last year, and the touchdowns could be about the same. I think you're going to see the rushing yardage come down for sure. But even with that, like, there's still plenty of meat on the bone for Saquon to pay off as a top 3, top 4 pick. So I can't sit here and call him a fade. I am saying he's going to regress, because it's almost impossible to have that many long touchdown runs. But there are other paths to Saquon picking up some value. And man, it's just the Eagles offense, Ian. Like they are so good and it's not just with Saquon. The last 3 years, they're one of the best teams in the league as far as scoring touchdowns per drive. So we don't really expect that to change, and Barkley's going to be involved.
Offensive line does return 4 of 5 starters. And yeah, no Kellen Moore anymore. But as we saw, man, maybe a little bit of extra pre-snap motion, but Kellen really didn't, I thought, put his imprint on this Eagles offense all that much as it was. They did their job. They won their Super Bowl. I'm not trying to hate on Kellen Moore. But again, this has always been a run-first offense. It's going to go through Saquon regardless of who is officially calling the plays out there. So I'm with you, man. I think you can make the argument that Bijan Robinson just doesn't have the age, doesn't have the same, career touch workload or injury history as Saquon. So if that's close enough, go ahead and just give it to Bijan. But anything lower than that, man, I really just think you're grasping at straws. I mean, are the people that want to sit here and throw out the, oh my gosh, running backs out there 370 regular season carries, Dwain, you just got to make that threshold as tight as possible. You can include the Le'Veon Bell, just the season he sat out. You can include the Zeke season where he got suspended 6 games to make those numbers great. Are those people ranking Saquon RB9, RB10 because he's just so sure going to be getting hurt? No, they rank him RB2 anyway, and that's what annoys me about it, man. Again, I know you said you've run those numbers. I've done it too. I looked at 400 or more touches, regular season and playoffs, okay? And dating back to, again, this entire basically time frame I was looking at, we still see the running backs the next year play an average of 12.7 games, median 15. That sounds pretty good to me, man. This is going back to 2010. That's about what running backs are always dealing with. It is a position that, yes, is going to get banged up a lot, but if it's not going to be an injury, I just don't see how Saquon's going to bust in any sort of a meaningful way.
Yeah, I think it's the running back workload thing is bunk. Like, I think we've proven that. It's just not a real thing. The drop in efficiency is going to happen. Like, you just can't score that many long touchdowns. But again, we just talked about it. Saquon does have other outs here. I'll say this, Ian. If I'm playing in a full PPR league and you got to start 3 wide receivers, I think that's an example where you could take 3 wide receivers before you take Saquon. But then you're kind of okay at the spot where it's like, all right, do I take Puka Nacua over Saquon? I don't think so. I think you're still taking Saquon Barkley at that point. So I think there are some, caveats here. If you play in a certain kind of league, full PPR, yada, 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 there are some reasons you might want to fade Saquon just as far as the top 3 picks and go with one of the wide receivers due to supply and demand. But otherwise, like, man, it's really hard to sit here and just say like that he's gonna fall off. Like, it's really hard to repeat as the top running back. Like, we've looked at that. Like, so there's a chance it's not him. So you can't think of it that way, but like, there's still a really good chance that Saquon's one of the top 3 running backs this season. And you still feel really good about the pick. He's giving you fantasy points week in and week out. He's not the guy that's dragging your team down.
Technically, last year, Jahmyr Gibbs with that massive Week 18 was able to seize the RB1 overall fantasy crown. But you aren't kidding, man. No running back has actually repeated as the RB1 overall since Priest Holmes back in 2002 and 2003. Kind of funny. Marshall Faulk happened to repeat the 2 years right before that. So again, not saying that Gibbs or Saquon or whoever can't put up these big numbers, but just a situation where, it's running backs. It's really hard to be that freaking good multiple years in a row. I think that's the main point you're trying to get through, Dwayne. We're not trying to do that, take away a player's good plays and look how average they are sort of thing. I mean, we just have not seen running backs really rip off that many long runs like Saquon did last year. But hey, we are talking about quite possibly the best running back in the world right now. So would make sense if he is able to keep on keeping on there. So let's say you are on the clock, Dwayne, and we'll go ahead and do just the sort of league settings that would be, easier, I guess, to somewhat face Saquon Barkley. Like you said, you got to start 3 wide receivers. It is full PPR scoring. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. Are those the only players you're taking ahead of Saquon?
Those are the ones I'm for sure taking ahead of Saquon.
Yep.
And then once you get to running back, I do think there's an argument for Bijan because, to your point, he is younger, but we feel better about, the Eagles offense, right? And their ability to really, post touchdowns. They could still potentially create plenty of long runs, not as many as last year, but with that offensive line and Jalen Hurts. So I think there's an argument to be made between Bijan and Saquon Barkley. And I know some people will listen to this and be like, oh man, like that's stupid. It's got to be Saquon. Guys, we do this every year where we think the guy that was the running back 1 the year before is the hands down got to be running back 1 this year. And like Ian said, it just rarely ever repeats. Now that doesn't make Saquon Barkley bad, but I do think it's a choice between Barkley and Bijan. If someone wanted to go Bijan, Ian, like, I'm not going to sit here and like curse them out and be like, hey, you're a complete idiot. It really could happen.
Be a pretty harsh way to, try to conduct your business in the fantasy streets, but certainly many people do go that route. I will say, the big thing with Bijan, in addition to age, it is that pass down work, as Dwayne mentioned. I mean, Bijan last year, 72 targets, just 43 for Saquon. We know Saquon is, a fantastic receiving back when they do want to put that on his plate. But again, with AJB, DeVonta, and a run-first offense, just tough to really get enough volume that we would prefer. So final stat I just want to end you guys on with, because I do think it's pretty cool. Eagles running backs, since Jalen Hurts took over full-time under center in 2021, they are tied for last in carries from the 1 yard line specifically, but between the 2 and 5 yard lines, they are easily in first place. So again, Saquon's going to get his chance, but you best believe if he gets within 3 feet of that goal line, it will become the Jalen Hurts show. But we've talked about 2 of the biggest stars on the Eagles, still plenty of more to get to. A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, even some Dallas Goedert. First, though, a quick word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Hey, you know you're not actually allowed to drink in a beer commercial?
Since when?
You gotta wait till it's done. Oh,
5,
4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, Dwain, A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith coming off of wide receiver 12 and wide receiver 15 finishes, respectively, in PPR points per game. Currently, AJB being priced as the wide receiver 10 in early drafts. DeVonta Smith all the way down there at the wide receiver 26. So, again, we talked about the run-first offense, a lot of different mouths to feed. I understand that's tough to get either guy too far up the ranks, just given the target ceilings, the kind of the cap ceilings, I should say, that we're looking at. But why would you explain, how would you explain that disparity between the ranks between AJB and DeVonta when, again, both guys are pretty freaking great at football?
Well, it's just AJB. What he does after the catch is on another level from DeVonta. They both earn targets, and AJB earns more targets, and his yards per route run are just superior. He can bust. He's just better. He can bust the big play, and that's nothing against DeVonta Smith, right. One of the best number 2 wide receivers in the entire NFL. Right? T. Higgins is going to have a spot in that argument. Jalen Waddle's going to get in there and have something to say, but DeVonta Smith certainly in that range, and I do believe if DeVonta Smith played in an offense that didn't already have a guy like A.J. Brown, we would probably see him more at that 25-26% target share. So what I did for this, Ian, and just thinking about what this could look like for these 3 players, I really went back to our question around Jalen Hurts. And are we so sure that they're really going to come out here with a drop back rate of 48%? That is a very, very hard thing to repeat. Even whenever you've got a running quarterback like Jalen Hurts and you got a stud quarterback like Saquon Barkley in that offensive line, we've thought we've known those sort of things would repeat in the past. We saw it with the Seahawks. We've even seen it with the 49ers a few times back in the Colin Kaepernick days. And guess what? It didn't repeat, guys. They actually ended up passing more next year. Now, that doesn't mean we think they're going to be a pass-heavy team, but I ran 3 scenarios for these receivers. I did it for Goedert too, but I'll save that for the next segment. And so what I did is, here are the things that are static. AJB, looking at his last 3 years of routes, I gave him a 92% route participation, 25% targets per route run. That's a 26% target share if you look at it over 16 games. If you look at DeVonta Smith, he actually leaves the field less than A.J. Brown, so I gave him 95% of the routes, 21% targets per route run, which comes out to a 22% target share over his 16 games. And then what I did is I just played with the drop back scenarios of how often this team drops back. I put the median this year at 54%. That's what I have it projected at, 48% last year. So I've got it coming up. Guys, just so you know, that's still a very conservative pass team. 54% is still conservative. But if we look at that, that would make A.J. Brown the wide receiver 9, okay? And that would make him at 16.7 fantasy points per game. So that's what you'll see when you look at my projections on the site, which you guys can check out. DeVonta Smith comes in at the wide receiver 17, 14.5 fantasy points per game. So pretty close to what you talked about earlier as far as where these guys are going in drafts. I will say DeVonta Smith looks like a little bit more of the value there because he's going a little bit later than that wide receiver 17 mark. But what if we crank that up to 58% drop back rate, which would still, guys, be what we would consider a run balanced team, not even a neutral team. A.J. Brown would go to wide receiver 5 with 17.9 fantasy points per game. DeVonta Smith would go to 15.6 fantasy points per game, making him a borderline wide receiver 1 as the wide receiver 13. So again, there is this range here where these guys could both be massive values. We know that they're good players. It could be what Ian said. Maybe the defense doesn't play as good. Maybe defenses play the run better because they got tired of seeing what happened to them last year. And maybe there's enough teams on the schedule that can figure out how to kind of divert some of those plays over to the passing game. Now, I did run the low end of it, Ian, which would be closer to last year, 50% drop back rate. That would put AJB at wide receiver 12 at 15.4 fantasy points per game. It would put DeVonta Smith closer to where he's going now. I think you're drafting DeVonta at his floor. Wide
Yeah.
receiver 23 is where he would come out at 13.4 fantasy points per game. So I think the big takeaways here, DeVonta's kind of a smash right now with where he's going. I think you're drafting him at his floor. If you get him at his median, he's going to beat where you're taking him. And AJB, if the Eagles do suddenly need to throw the ball more, and again, not pass crazy, just, run balance to a balanced offense, man. We're talking about a guy, Ian, that has the talent to be a top 3 wide receiver in the NFL, despite how loaded the position is right now. And that would put him at wide receiver 5, and the dude's going in the middle of round 2 right now. And so, I mean, that could be a massive hit for you in fantasy.
And the great thing about this passing game, just how condensed it really is around both these guys. I mean, last year we're talking about a combined 58% target share that ranks second among teammate wide receiver duos because we had Neighbors and Scamdale Robinson doing their thing in New York. 80% combined air yard share, though that is absolutely ridiculous, and that mark is indeed tied for first. So AJB, again, going to be our consensus wide receiver 10. Dwain has Ladd McConkey ranked ahead of him. Honestly, when I've been in drafts myself, I have, Fuller, but taken Ladd ahead of AJB. But to me, Dwain, that really is the tier break out wide receiver where I get into round 2. I'm usually looking at these guys, is Drake London still available, AJB, Ladd McConkey? If not, I'm really moving my attention to Devon Achane, Jonathan Taylor's of the world, because after that, T. Higgins, Rashee Rice, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm not saying they can't have great years, but again, just less questions than someone like AJB. It really is DeVonta Smith being the one that maybe we do need to be rallying around a bit more often. So I am the highest of the fantasy life rankers on DeVonta. He comes in as my wide receiver 23, current ADP wide receiver 27, but man, Dwain, it is interesting at that spot. You have him going right next to Travis Hunter. You have more clear number 1 wide receivers like Cortland Sutton and DK Metcalf, but in passing games that maybe we don't have the same expectations for efficiency-wise. So early on in drafts, again, DeVonta, usually someone that you're still going to have to use that late round 4, maybe early round 5 pick on. Have you found yourself clicking his name more times than not?
I do take him some. It's in a tough little pocket, though, because I really do like Travis Hunter. Like, I think there are things to like about DK Metcalf. George Pickens is going right after that range as well, who probably carries a little bit more touchdown upside. So I think the group of players that are sitting there together, I think it makes sense, right? And each one of them kind of have their own scenario to the point of the projections, right? DeVonta has really been one of the more consistent players out of those. And so I think you can feel really good about that. The question is his path to ceiling, which would probably be contingent upside if A.J. Brown, knock on wood, we don't want it to happen. But if he were to miss 4 or 5 games like in a row, Ian, like DeVonta Smith is a guy that we're going to be ranking him as a wide receiver 1. So that's where it gets interesting, because DK Metcalf, we're looking at him as the only thing in town for his offense, and we've got him as a wide receiver 2. If DeVonta was the only thing in town for his offense, we would be ranking him as a wide receiver 1. So very talented player, does have other paths to upside. Even if the team's healthy, though, I think you're still getting a good value on DeVonta Smith, the player.
Actually, even more weapons to talk about in this Philadelphia Eagles offense as we move on to tight end Dallas Goedert, someone who, Dwain, wasn't even a guarantee to be on this team after the Super Bowl. And we're talking about a guy that was involved in trade rumors, even that post-June 1st cut potential all throughout the offseason. However, was able to, work through his issues with the front office, and we are once again expecting Dallas Goedert to be the tight end, y'all, in Philly, at least for 2025. So looking at his numbers, man, ever since Zach Ertz was originally shipped off from the Cardinals, Goedert hasn't managed to maintain, full health. We actually have seen him miss 15 games over the course of the past 3 seasons, but 2022, he was tight end 5. Last season, he was tight end 11. 2023, he was tight end 12. Right now, just going as a tight end 15, Dwain. And again, it feels like a similar DeVonta Smith situation where we like Dallas Goedert, we like the talent, we like everything about him, but again, it's just tough to get too overly excited about the ceiling when he is more likely not going to be a number 3 option. But I will say, I do feel like that tight end 15 ADP still probably being influenced by those months of uncertainty. And at that price point specifically, I really like that value.
Yeah, I agree. I think Dallas Goedert could still easily post a top 12 tight end season. Could be a little rough as to when you get the production, but that's most tight ends, guys. It's like, did they score a touchdown or not? We've got the elite guys we can really count on, pretty much week in, week out. And then you got a group of guys, where it's like, okay, they've got a nice role in the offense, but did they score a touchdown this week? And when we look at Dallas Goedert, I went back, Ian, and just looked at the plays over the last 3 seasons for the Eagles, where we had Dallas Goedert plus A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith on the field. And I think this is the other thing holding him down. 33% target share for AJB, just absolute alpha, 2.75 yards per route run. Then you got DeVonta Smith coming in behind him, 22% of the targets with a 1.61 yards per route run. And then you've got Dallas Goedert, a 21% target share at 1.39 yards per route run. Hanging tough, though, there with DeVonta, like not just getting lapped by DeVonta. So I think there's a world where he and DeVonta Smith end up really close, right? And their target share, I've got Dallas Goedert projected for 14 and a half games instead of 16 for DeVonta, just because of the injury stuff you've talked about. Plus, just typically tight ends, I put them on the same range as running backs as how often they get hurt, so they get docked a little bit more. So the other thing we know is with the receivers, right? We just know there's more upside as far as just total yardage and touchdowns and things like that. But having said all that, if one of these guys miss time, man, Dallas Goedert is going to be squarely in that mid-range tight end one category. We've seen it a few times over the last couple of years when you haven't had one of those others, and it's been really good for Goedert. So I think, to your point, I think Dallas Goedert is probably still a top 10 talent in the NFL as far as tight end, getting a little bit up there in age, but this is a guy that can work underneath. He can stretch the seams. There's a lot of different things he can do, and he's in an offense that we know is going to score a lot of touchdowns. So I do agree with you. I think tight end 15, I get the reason why people are putting him in that range, but he could easily pay off and be worth more than that.
And again, these are the kind of tight ends I'm trying to target in that range. Players who are really good in real life. And hopefully, if we do get a couple extra targets per game here and there, they can really, again, make that cost worthwhile. Because you just look at last year specifically, and man, yards per out run on one axis, targets per out run on the other. We see 5 tight ends separated from the rest of the league. And it's George Kittle, Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, Jonnu Smith, shout out. And yes, Dallas Goedert himself as well. So someone where I think earlier in this offseason, when I did have those concerns, it was like, okay, well, maybe give me the Dalton Kincaids and the Jake Fergusons of the world over him. But again, now that we know that life is good in Philly, go Birds, Dallas Goedert, one of the best late round tight ends that money can buy in the year 2025. So Dwain, that is going to take us to our win total section of the team preview. Eagles sitting pretty at 11.5. And again, I understand it's easier to look at that over all the time, but that's exactly what I'm going to do. Give me over 11.5 wins for a team that has averaged 13 wins per season since 2022. What say you, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, they've had 14, 11, and 14 wins, and they've got it at 11.5. I'm going to take the over. I just look at this offense. It's so loaded. They got the offensive line back, even though they do lose a little bit on defense. I think the offense has the weapons that if they need to, and they need to get into more shootouts and they need to win that way, I think they definitely have the firepower to do that. So I think there's many, many roads that can lead to beating that 11.5 wins, and it could just be on offense alone. So I do feel really good about that. The last thing I would say here on the Eagles, Ian, would be if there is a sleeper, one name for folks to remember, not saying you're drafting this player in your fantasy draft if you're in a home league that's 14, 15 rounds, but it's Will Shipley. Yeah. If something did happen to Saquon Barkley, Will Shipley is a guy that we saw in college, didn't quite live up to like his recruiting profile, coming out of high school at Clemson, but still was that dual threat archetype that we like. He got it done on the ground, was really good as a receiver out of the backfield. So I think he could plug right in and be a 3-down back. Now, will A.J. Dillon still some of those things? Maybe, but I think we've seen A.J. Dillon long enough to know that, man, if Will Shipley's showing anything, he could have a chance to just ice A.J. Dillon, and he's in this really good offense. So Will Shipley is that name. If you're in a deep league, he's a great sleeper. If you're playing in a more shallow league, it's just a name to remember on the waiver wire for any reason. And knock on wood, we don't want this to happen. But if Saquon were to need to miss a couple of games because he wins that Powerball that Ian's always talking about, we would be in love with Will Shipley.
Shipley definitely RB2 in Philly after Kenneth Gainwell took his talents to Pittsburgh during the offseason. And I do just want to stress, Dwayne, when you are in those later stages of the draft, don't be so worried about having equal numbers of wide receivers and running backs, all right? If you got 5 top 50 wide receivers in a lot of home leagues, you're probably fine, okay? Drafting the wide receiver 80 does nothing for me, all right? I want to load up. I want to take 6 or 7 consecutive handcuff running backs if I really did not, stress that position early on. And even if Shipley isn't replacing Saquon as the RB1 or anything like that, if he goes down, we still would be talking about someone with the sort of explosive pass catching ability to really be a big factor in PPR land. So I'm with you. Once I do get to those later stages of the draft, Will Shipley, Miles Sanders, Jalen Wright, three of those names that I have been, again, clicking far more than not. But speaking of Miles Sanders, we have plenty more NFC East goodness on the way, everyone, as we get through all of our team previews. Commanders, Cowboys, and Giants coming up next. So appreciate you guys tuning into the Fantasy Live Show for now. For Dwayne, for producer Kelsey, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, take care, everybody.